Well, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me here today. This is Paul Taubman with 9.Connects, and you are in the right place if you are here for our webinar on Draftsman tool. This is a bit of a revisit of this editor. It's not a 100% duplication. In fact, it's a complementary video to the original document we did about 6 years ago. So with that being said, let's get on with it over here. Just a housekeeping note. If you have any questions, you have the GoToMeeting panel. Within the panel, there's a region called questions. Feel free to write those questions in there. Behind the scenes with me here today are Tom Cassidy and Eric Gross, both of which are familiar with the Draftsman tool, so they should be able to help you with questions as we go along today. I'm going to take most of the hour, so we'll see if we get time for questions. Hopefully, Tom and Eric will be able to answer your questions. If we can't get to them, where there's a question that needs some research or a little more explanation, then we'll take it offline, review it, and provide you a response thereafter. All right, want to jump on in over here. We're going to get our first polling question just to get you guys loose. Kind of curious, what's your familiarity with Draftsman? So we'll get that poll going here. Okay, I'm going to close it out here. So actually, this is a really interesting group. I was really expecting a lot more people to say that they had a bit of experience with it. So I've got everybody across the board. All right, that's good. That's definitely good. So I will jump back to some fundamental points as I'm going along here today. As I present this webinar. Okay, so let me give you my objectives. I'm going to go through the functionality of Draftsman, but these are the things I'm specifically going to talk about. Number one, I'm going to talk about templates. So I'm jumping a little ahead of myself over here. In the templates, I want to talk about this because I want to give some pointers to those who are making templates, but also want to give pointers to those who want to use the templates. And so hopefully we've had to do this for a couple of our customers. We learned a few things in the process of doing this, so I want to share those little tips and tricks that we have found. We'll also talk about dimensions. I find sometimes these dimensions are a little tricky to get used to, so I just want to go through all of them very quickly and show you how they work. Sometimes you got to do 2 clicks, sometimes you got to do it only on an arc, sometimes you can do it on an arc, or you can do it on a point, or you can do it on a flat surface. Let's talk about those things so that you can get a better idea of how to make those dimensions work for you without having to quote unquote fight them. And we're also talk a little bit about control frames and datums. It is a feature in Altium. They've had it since pretty much day one that they've put this tool together. In the last webinar I did several years ago, I kind of glossed over it, but I'd like to give you probably a quick nickel tour of what control frames and datums is all about. It has to do with something called GDT. And just to show you that it's there and maybe one that you might want to use. Though for the most part, and just to give you a little history, for all the years they've been with 9.Connects, and that goes back to 2011, there's only one time we had a customer say, where's the control frame and the datums? It's not something we normally do here on the electrical side, but the mechanical folks, if they are looking at your drawings, may ask for those. And the other one as well is surface finishes. There's actually some symbology that Altium provides as well. You may not use it, but it's probably good just to know that it's there. And as I mentioned earlier on, this webinar complements the original webinar we did 6 years ago. As a matter of fact, I went through that original webinar before and I was practicing and pulling all this stuff together before this webinar today. And what I really want to do is avoid duplication. There are some really cool things in there that if you're looking for, especially when it comes to the tables or the bill of materials or even the notes. I will cover a little bit about the notes again, but there's some things in there that you can look at that will give you some of the fundamental foundations if you're still trying to get a grasp of it. But I think hopefully after I show you what's going on over here, you'll get the general gist of how Draftsman works, regardless of what you're trying to do with it. Okay, and the name of that webinar is called Making the Most of Draftsman and Blueprint. And the reason we put Blueprint in here is because before Draftsman, there was a product from a company called Downstream Technologies called Blueprint. Not that Altium stole it, but Altium effectively copied the concept. So they basically looked at Blueprint, said, this is really cool. We can make this do the same thing in our own editor, and they developed Draftsman based off of what Blueprint does. So if you actually have copies of Blueprint where you're at, Draftsman and Blueprint work remarkably similar to each other. So that's why we called it Making the Most of Draftsman and Blueprint. All right, with that being said, I want to go through a couple of recall notes about Draftsman that are kind of important. Number one, it's for human readable documents. And that's kind of a good thing, right? Because the intention is to communicate with another human. You know, if you're creating something for a machine, you got to get it right, and the machine's only going to do what you tell it to do, right? Gerber files, NC drill files, PNP files, Those have to be right. Otherwise, the machine's not going to do what you intended it, what you had hoped intended for it to do, right? And then, of course, for the human readable documents, it's really just a matter of making sure that you communicate clearly your intentions with the fabricator and or the assembler, depending on what you're putting the draftsman information, who you're creating that draftsman information for. All right, there's usually true draftsman files that you're going to create with every project. One of them is going to be for fabrication, and the other one's going to be for assembly. Now, there could be some exceptions to that, like if you're using a CM or you're handing this off to a massive company like Foxconn, and you're saying, here it is, take it, fabricate it, build it, right? In those cases there, you could probably put everything into one large draftsman file. But for most of us, we normally deal with the fabrication and the assembly as two different organizations. And so as a result, we'd want to have those as two separate files. And also for revision control purposes too, you'd want to have these as separate revisions, which therefore means separate files. Okay. Just a couple extensions. There's a lot of extensions that get thrown around here. So let's take a look at these, and I'll try not to rush through these because you know, they're new to the eye, right? We're kind of used to SCH docs and PCB docs, but these kind of, you know, if you look at them, they kind of make some sense, but at the same time, there's a newness to them. So getting your head wrapped around them may take a little while. But the general extension for anything that's Draftsman, so you do a file, new Draftsman, it's going to be a PCB DWF. Okay. Now we start getting into templates. There's actually two different template types in Altium, and you'll see why they did this here in a little bit. One of them is the DWS DOT. This is an overlay that is very, very similar to the SCH DOT file. So if you are working in a schematic and you say, I want to add an overlay on that, then you put that overlay on top of that. It's a read only. You can have parameters that you can change, but you don't change them directly on the schematic sheet. And if you need to make any change to it, you have to actually open up the SCH DOT file, make the changes to it, and then you push that back into your regular schematic or schematics. Okay, so the DWS works the exact same way. It's for each sheet that you have in the Draftsman file. And secondly, there's an overall template for the entire Draftsman. And this is really important because we can predefine placements. And this is really, really useful. So in a sense, it's kind of almost like an out job for graphics. So if you're like saying, well, look, I've got to have an assembly view and I've got to have these different fabrication views and I've got to have this angle, like let's say an isometric view here, and I want some drill drawing type things in there, you can actually set those up on a dummy board, put those in there, and then when you actually bring it in, it will feed in the correct information or update it with your real board. And I will demonstrate all this to you here in just a moment. Now, how do you remember which ones are which? I always remember the S, because the S to me always means SCHDOT or means sheet, and that's how I kind of remember this is specific to the sheet, not the entire Draftsman template. The DWF is a template for the entire Draftsman, and you'll see how this works here in just a few moments. Okay. Draftsman generates images based off of the existing sources. So when we mean by source files, we're talking about the PCB doc, and we're talking about all of your schematic docs. Okay, so that's what's kind of nice. Now, the reason I bring this up is because 6 years ago, when Draftsman first came out, this was a huge shift in the way we created documentation. And most people, and I remember this very well, you had to use mechanical layers. And if you're going to use the mechanical layers, you had to be very, very exacting in your PCB footprint libraries, right? You had to make sure all these mechanical layers lined up. And when Draftsman came out, now you don't have to have all these additional mechanical layers. In fact, in the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot of libraries for customers, cleaning them up. And they're saying, get rid of these mechanical layers. We don't want to deal with them anymore because they're just adding time and bureaucracy to our whole library. We just want to minimize that because Draftsman takes care of this. So Draftsman just takes it and pulls it in. Now, I'm not saying don't have mechanical layers, but what I'm saying is that this reliance that we used to have, and it was a very heavy reliance on mechanical layers to draw up documentation, is no longer there. Draftsman is the way to create this. And so as far as I'm concerned, because I've been with Altium since 2007, used to work for them, and then now I'm obviously working with 9.Connects, but as an expert in Altium Designer, I'd say the two fundamental things that really propelled Altium to where it is today is, number one, is 3D capabilities, but then this Draftsman tool is just a phenomenal way of creating documentation. I think it's made it even easier to create this stuff. So, but it goes back to the fact we're not relying on mechanical files, we're relying on source files. Okay, updates are static, not dynamic. That's how Altium has always worked, especially with its libraries. And that's a good thing because you might change something, you didn't realize that it had an impact somewhere else. So Altium expects you to say, yes, I made this change, update this, okay? And unlike other editors, in Altium Designer, it is a multi-sheet editor. So if you think about the PCB doc, the schematic docs, even the library doc, the editors, right? Both the PCB editor and the schematic editor, well, um, they're basically single. They're basically a single editors. Even though yes, you can look at different things at different times. You can only look at one sheet at a time, or one component at a time, or one footprint at a time. Okay, and just in time, it's almost as if Altium knew we were going to do this presentation. This release 24.7.2, which I think is about a week old, if that, enhances the editing responses. So those people who have used Draftsman for a while, one of the biggest frustrations they've had is that there's a lot of lag in the commands that you give. And they've said, and people have complained about that. Altium has actively addressed it, and they've asked people to give feedback, and what I'm seeing is that it has greatly enhanced the editing response. Now, would I have seen those lags? Probably not, only because if you're working on a board that has 10,000 components and Altium is pulling information based off of existing sources, then obviously it's got to read through the entire database, and there's going to be some lags as a result of that. So I think they were able to reduce some of this lag that people have been seeing. So if you need to know more information about that, go to altium.com, you log in, you can go into the bug crunch, and you can see what people have written about this new release and this issue about the lags. So, but it looks like they fixed it, or have definitely enhanced it, which is a great thing. Okay, well, enough talking to these slides. Let's get on to the good stuff here. I'm going to hit escape. All right, and move this over here. We'll get to this. There's a few other slides I'll show you as we go along here today. So I am in Altium Designer. Just to give you a little preface as to what you're seeing over here on the screen, I have what I'll call a template file project. It's a pure JPCB, and I'm using this over here to help me put together templates. Now, one of the things we always push, and we've done this in other videos, but I want to reemphasize this, that if you're going to create a template, there's always going to be parameters involved in those templates. And if you're going to do those parameters, they should all be kept in one area. And in Altium, that place is in the project itself. Okay, so let me just give you an example of how that looks. So let me go over here to project options. And then from there, you can see that I've got my parameters. And so you can see a whole list of these various parameters. And as we've worked with our customers over time, we've developed things to kind of help make these project parameters useful to us. Right, so one thing we try to do is we try to give it prefixes so that we know, is it universal or is it something that we can use in another editor? So for example, you'll see ones here for block. That means that this would probably be usable in any block, whether it's a schematic title block or in a PCB title block if you still happen to have one, or for a Draftsman title block. You can even use some of these here in the out jobs. You can actually use project parameters and direct the names accordingly. As a matter of fact, these revisions were created so that people could add the revision numbers to their out job files as they were generating them. Okay, and if there are things that are very specific to Draftsman or very specific to the out job or specific to the schematics, you can see that we gave that the prefix here. Most of these had to do with the revision block that you'll see here in just a moment. On the other side, the values, we can't work with stars because you have no idea what the star means. So what we do is we create a value that looks very similar to the name, so we can reference back to this if we need to. We also put everything in square brackets, and the reason we do that is that that's an indicator to us or to a checker that we have forgotten to fill in a value. So that's how we basically set this up over here. And so now we've got these project parameters, and now that I've got those, in order to make use of these, I actually have to work in the project. So what I've done over here is I've brought two of these templates out here on this side so that you can kind of see what it looks like when they're not in a project and what they look like when they are in a project. So let's start off, as I mentioned earlier, there's two different schematic template types. And the first one we're going to do is the one that's called the sheet template. Okay, so this is the sheet template. So what you're doing is you're focusing on one sheet, and again, as a quick recall, once this gets placed, it's an overlay in the Draftsman, and I cannot change anything. I can change things in the parameters, but I cannot change any of the graphical aspects of this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to zoom into this just to show you. So this over here is a block, and in this block over here, you can see that it says equal Draftsman such and such and such. So this was the parameter name, but Altium cannot find where it's at. So it's first going to look in the local document. And if it doesn't find the local document, it's going to look in the project document. But there's no project document because I'm in a free doc. And so this is how it's going to look. Now you could work in this environment. I find this to be remarkably difficult to do. So here, I'm just going to bring this down over here. If you look down and I zoom into this here, you can see again, Altium cannot find the values for these parameters. So what do? It's great to have this if you have your PRJ PCB that's got all these parameters in it, then you just drag it in here. And in fact, I'll demonstrate that. If I drag this one in, you'll now see it picked up on all the project parameters and you see the results of those. Okay, so for those who are using A365, and by the way, this is also true for those who are not using 365, but I want to talk about those who are using 365 because there's some games you got to play here to make this work. If you are trying to create things in 365 and you want to use the project parameters, you would go into the Explorer panel here, you would open up a DW, either brand new, or you'd open up a new one saying DWS DOT file, okay? And you would also have to have a project template as well in your A365. So once you've opened both of them up, you drag this one in, the one that you're creating, the DWS DOT, so that you now have access to those parameters, do the work that you need to do, drag it back out, and then save it to server. And then as for the PRJ PCB, if you happen to make some changes to your project parameters, then obviously you'd want to save that as well. The intention is not to save your template with these DOT files in it. These DOT files should remain separate because the intention of that project is for source files and an actual Draftsman document, which these templates can be added to. The intention is not to have the actual templates as a part of the project itself. So that's what normally I do is I take it, I open it, I drag it into the project, do the work I need to, and then drag it back out. And again, that works both primarily for A365, but even if you're not using 365, you'd still want to do that because, in fact, I'm not even using 365 for this. You can see I'm not logged in. What I did was I just used the template directory that Altium provides automatically in the public documents, and I've stored those over there, and that's why you see these little redirects symbols that you have here. But that's what I had to do. If I want to work on these, I got to drag it into the project, and then if I don't want it to remain in the project because I don't want to save it as a PRJ PCB, I drag it back out. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, now, since I'm over here, I want to talk about a few things that we learned about when you create these title blocks. There's two ways to create title blocks. A classic way that I've used in the past, actually, let me take a step back because I'm going to explain something that frustrates the hell out of people, but hopefully this will make some sense as to why it is what it is. You may have already created a really nice block for your schematic and say, man, I just like to use the same one for my Draftsman. Why can't I copy and paste it in there? Really, the simple answer is this, is that even though the place menu has a lot of things that come from the schematic editor, what I have found is that the properties are different. Even the text property, for example, let me, actually, I'll just click on this one here. So if I click on this text here and I go to its properties, Altium doesn't necessarily have the exact same properties that you see over here, right? Because those editors were created, 10, 15 years ago, and this is a relatively new editor, so they added some features in here that they don't have, and they can't necessarily just go back and say, well, let's go back to the schematic one and change that because now you're going to change the formatting, and that's going to have a huge impact on reverse compatibility. So unfortunately, yes, if you have a really cool one that you want to use, there's no mechanism to import it in. You're going to have to draw it again. So I'll be the bearer of bad news about that. With that being said, if you are going to draw this again, there's two ways I found to do this. One of them is to draw through lines, which you can see over here. The other one is to draw based on stacking boxes. You can go in the place menu, hit the rectangle, and then from there you can draw your boxes. So here's the first box, for example, and then maybe you say, okay, after I clean this up and give it the right colors, I do a Control-C. If you do a Control-C, you are going to get a prompt here for a reference. I'll click on that and I'll do a Control-V, Control-V to take it. There it is. And then I'll drop it on. Now, if you notice here, sometimes, and I've just had some real frustrations with this, it doesn't always get in there very cleanly. So you kind of have to move it around a little bit. And this is why I tend to move away from the boxes, because it seems like the boxes have a little bit of drift to them. I'm not sure why that's been happening. And I just find that sometimes it's just easier to work with the lines. And even the lines sometimes have a little more drift to them, but you can correct them pretty easily. The other reason I like the lines too is that if, say, for instance, I had to, and I'll bring it over here, if, say, for instance, I didn't want to have, I wanted to create something here, I wanted to remove this one, I can easily just hit this and delete it and move these accordingly. So there's a little bit of, there's some things that make it a little bit easier in trying to drag around boxes. At least that's been my experience putting these together. As for the text themselves, the other things I have found about the text is, number one, make the box the exact same size. The text box the same size as the box that you've created here, and just center them off, and it works out pretty nicely. And again, I have noticed some little drift things that are going here, but not enough to get overly concerned about it. Here's an example again of text, but this time it is referencing a project parameter. We know this by the equal signs. Sometimes you do have to have something where it's going to start on the left side, so you'd want to set left justify it. And that's what we did on this one example here. One of the things you want to keep in mind too is that you want to make sure that these boxes are big enough for what you plan on putting in there. And I'm going to give you an example of that, because unlike, let's say, PowerPoint, where if you go in PowerPoint, you keep typing, it keeps on reducing the font to make it fit a lot of times, right? Altium doesn't do that. Altium is going to just give you whatever it can fit in there. I'll give you an example of that. If we look at this over here, 9.connects, and I say, okay, I'm going to add a new line here, and I can do that by either holding the shift down, hitting enter, or the alt and hitting enter. And if I start typing stuff over here, this gobbledygook, okay, well, the property is in there, or it's a part of the property, but you don't see it. And again, that's because this box is not big enough. And there it is. So just keep that in mind when you draw these, when you're coming up a title box. If you got some people with long names in here, you may want to consider how the name is going to impact the size of that box. So, and then other things like, adding in your company logo, that can be done through the place menu under graphic here. And it just a matter of you adding in the information and keeping it consistent. I've always been a big fan of, once you've got something like this piece of text over here, if I'm going to create something similar down here, then I can just do a Control-C and then take that and then change it from that point on, because that will allow for the general consistency across everything. And that's one of the key things, is being consistent. So there's some things for you to consider when you're putting together your template. Okay, let me jump back over here to the project. So that is for one sheet. So we can apply this to each sheet that we add in our Draftsman document. But what about, we want to set up something so that I can just, for initially just puts everything in there and then I can really run with it. Well, let's take a look at that. What I'm going to jump over here is to this one. Now this is the fabrication.dwf dot, not the DWS dot. So let's click on this here. Okay. All right. And all right. And let's take a look at this over here. I just realized I had a polling question. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to still do this, even though I'm already halfway through talking about the templates. Can we get that? I'm going to get that next polling question going here. And it was really about the question about the templates. So I'm going to launch that one here. So if you could just let me know, have you used the templates? Are you using them? Or do you create them? And I do apologize, I probably should have put this one up a little earlier. I got too excited and jumped on into things. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to close this over here, and you can see over here, 55% of you said that you, basically you're 55% of you are basically creating both of them. So that's about half of you, and then some of you guys are using them, but someone else is providing for you, which is great as well. So if they are, and I get that too, because sometimes the companies are saying, look, we can't have everybody doing their own thing, and that whole idea of having uniformity is a big thing. I totally get that there, but hopefully you kind of see, as I'm going through this, maybe you're not creating these, but then you can see the fun that they're having in creating them. So it gives you probably a new perspective on that. And for those, I'm kind of surprised I put that last one in there about only creating them. So those who are just creating them, hopefully if there's a, giving you some tips and tricks that are going to make it a little bit easier for you if you are trying to maintain these and moving forward. Okay, with that being said, I'm going to go over here and click back into my screen, and we'll continue on with the other type of template. So this template over here uses the DWS, right? So you can see that it's already in here, and I can easily get to this and change those by going into the properties, clicking somewhere in the blank part of my editor here, and then from there I can basically go into the page options here and add in the templates as I see fit. So I can put those in, I can refresh them if there's been some changes to them. So I'll say yes, there shouldn't be any major changes to those, but nevertheless I do that. Now if you do that, you've got to do it for each page. Okay, so just be aware of that. I thought Altium used to have a universal one that allowed you to do it to all of them, but I do not see that in here anymore. But maybe that's something I dreamt, pardon me, but nevertheless, yeah, you've got to go to each page if you're going to do an update to each one of them. But you can put in things, everything that you see over here that you see, like these notes, this generic form for the top layer, this, which I think is I think this one is, let me see which view this is. Yeah, this is a board fabrication view. There's a layer stack legend that you can have here. So where do these all come from first and foremost? So for those who are new to this, I'm going to give you kind of the, hopefully this will give you a universal view of Altium Designer and all of its editors. In Altium, everything is done through a graphics. You cannot define a graphic on your own. Altium's already predefined all the graphics. I call them primitives. If you want to know what primitives Altium can put down over here, then you look in the place menu, and these are all your primitives that you can put down. So the first grouping over here are all your lines and everything that's really quote unquote non-electrical. So those are all the things that you can use to draw and add things in there. And the graphic is one, again, pulling something like a JPEG into your Draftsman here. These other ones over here would be of some value to them. So this is stuff that would be rendered based off of either this, primarily off of the PCB doc, but some of the stuff could be rendered, like the bill of materials could be out of the schematic doc as well. And there's also additional views that they've added over time. Some of them could be very useful, some of them you may not need at all. For example, there's one here that's like, if you're not doing any counter hole view, then it doesn't make sense to have a hole view here. And I would encourage you to kind of play with a lot of these. A lot of them are just really niceties to have. They're really not, I'd say, totally critical, though the component view could be really useful if you've got a very complex component here. Most of the ones that you've got listed over here are the key ones that the manufacturer, and that being the fabricator, the assembler, would need to have. We'll talk about the dimensions over here in just a moment, but the short of it all is that whatever editor you're working in Altium Designer, you're normally dealing with a graphic, and those graphics are all generally listed here in the place menu. There might be some few exceptions of things that might only show up depending on some circumstance where you're going into some editor and it has to indicate something, like let's say the variant will put some X on something that you've told it to do. But for the most part, if you're placing a primitive, it's going to come from here. So just keep that in mind. And if you want more information about a lot of these, again, take a look at that original webinar we did here a couple of years ago. But the idea behind this is just to put something in here, a placeholder. So you can see that this is the classic 4x6 board. So we had a PCB dock initially that we used, and we said, okay, we'll take that off of there, put that in here. Take the layer stack legend, which is only 2 layers, put it in there. Okay, these notes over here are ones that were developed over time, so we put those in here through what's called the notes. Okay, and then either drill drawing views here. The other thing that I was going to mention, and so on and so forth, but the point here is that what we try to do is you also have these notes here, which is nice because then it says, hey, when you're doing this, here's some instruction for you. So if you're trying to keep that uniformity amongst everything, the template will take it far. But you may also need to put some additional notes to the designer to say, hey, look, you may have to scale this because when this stuff comes in, the scale might be way too big, right? Or this thing might not be the style that they want to use. There's other ways of looking at the board stack here. You can say like real widths and heights, or if you just want to use the default one that looks like this, right? So it all depends on how you want to shape and do this. We put these notes in there to give instructions to the designer with the intention of the designer deleting these notes once they are done. So another nice way to make this work. Okay. Now, one other thing I'll mention to you, may say like, well, this is great. I've seen everything so far. I'm new to this. How do I even create these documents? Well, I should probably show this at the beginning here, but the way you do that, you go to File, New, and you'd go into your Draftsman document. Here, you would say default. Don't add anything here because you can ultimately pick a template, but the intention is to create. If you're trying to create something new, start with a default, press OK. Okay. You'll get a blank screen that looks like this once it comes up. It's thinking here. And so it'll look like this. And then from that point on, you can either create your DWS or your DWF. Now, how do you save it? So if your intention was to create a DWS file, you'll go into File, save as, and it's at the bottom over here that you're going to want to say, okay, I want to save this one as a DWS, or in this case, I'm going to create it as a DWF file. Okay, and so again, this one's for the sheets, the individual sheets, and this one over here is for an overall template. So hopefully I've made that clear. Okay, and that's how you'd save those off. And of course, once you saved it, make sure you save it in the place that makes sense. So for example, if there's if you're doing an A365, you want to save it appropriately in the right directory in A365. If you're just working in a shared directory system, there should be a location where Altium is pointing to that has all the company templates, and that can be set up in the and that can definitely be set up in the preferences. So, okay. So I'm going to close this one, but just wanted to demonstrate that to you because I think it's sometimes we got to go back to the fundamentals there. Okay, so I do have this one. It's already been set up for me. Now, if I want to use it, okay, let's take a look at that. If I want to use that, let's go back over here to projects. Well, again, you've already created this. It's in the right location. Altium can find it. If I go here or if I go into the file, doesn't matter which one, I say, okay, I'm going to add new to project, and I'm going to click on Draftsman document. Then I can see that I do have these two templates over here. Now, again, keep in mind the DWS documents are not going to be listed here. These are just overall templates. Okay, so these are both the DWF templates. I'm going to use the fabrication one, and I'll press OK. So when I bring this in, it's automatically taken all the information from that template, but now it's rendering everything to update it based off of this PCB doc, not the generic 4x6 PCB doc I used before when this happened. So it looks like it's done. Let's bring it in. So this should look familiar to you. I've used this in other webinars in the past. This is the layout for what we call our 9-dot die. And so if I want to change these things, likely you'll have to change it because it might be too small or too big. And at that point, one of the things you're going to learn about Draftsman very quickly is half the battle is just finding the placement that you want. The other half is working the properties and seeing if you can get it to configure the way you want to configure. Okay, so if I here, this looks like if I don't want the scaling, I want a different scaling, like a 1-to-1 scaling, I can do that. If I want to change the custom scaling, I can do it. The titles I can change and so on and so forth. So it's just a matter of going through the properties to see how you'd like to present it, right? It may not even be this layer. It could be one of the other layers that's in there. So you can say, okay, I don't want layer top. I always thought this was weird. I always felt the top should be up here because that's one of the key elements of this. But nevertheless, like if I want the flex layer, there's the flex layer. And you can see it auto updates as we go along. Well, I shouldn't say auto updates. It updates as I tell it the changes here. It's not dynamic, it's static. So there, I just want to catch myself up on that. Okay, and there you go. You can see these other things that got dropped in here as well. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go down to this blank page. And hopefully I've made it clear that these over here are the DWS. These were brought in as a part of the original template. If I don't want these, because I want to make this very clear, the difference between the different documents. Let's say don't want these. Here I could click on standard and those would go away. But notice it only goes away for the active sheet I'm in, not for the sheet that you see up here. Okay? And of course, if I want to bring these back over here, I can do this, fabrication over page. I'm sorry, to put it back in. I guess it automatically put it in because I clicked on it. Usually after you do standard, you click on template, it's going to say, well, what template do you want to use? But apparently I remembered which one it was. There it is. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, just to give you a very, I'll do just a very quick placement here. If I do a place board assembly view, I'm going to drop this one in. Okay, you can see how easy it is to do that there. And I am going to turn off the title, and I'm going to do a 2-to-1 here, and you'll see why in a moment, because I'm going to talk about dimensions. And here we go. Now for the dimensions, and this is the assembly view, which is perfectly fine for what I'm going to try to do here. The dimensions are all listed in the place menu. What I have found is that people get frustrated with them because you're not really sure what to tell the dimension because it is supposed to give prompts. Now, one thing I've noticed, maybe I'm overlooking something, and so if somebody knows where it is, make a comment in the questions panel there. But in other editors, Altium has a command prompt. And I don't see it in here. So I've gone looking for this, and the command prompt usually tells you what the next step is. So if it's like, well, give me the first point, give me the second point, I don't really see that in here. Usually it's under the view menu. So there's a status bar, but there's also a command bar, and I don't see it. So, okay, so be it. So I'm gonna walk through these here, and hopefully you can make heads or tails of what I'm presenting, but I think it'll be useful so that you don't have to go fight it yourself. Let's talk about linear dimensions. There's actually 2 ways to do linear dimensions. The first one you can do is you can either just put it on the line, drag it out, and voila, you're done. Or you can give it 2 points. So if and you'll notice, I'm gonna zoom as much as possible, you can see this. So you add the line there. So you do need, when you're doing dimensions, you really got to look for this yellow, this orangey prompt, because that's going to tell you whether or not that's allowable or it's not allowable. So if I go over here to this radius, it kind of allows me to do it. So you can see there, I can do it on the radius as well. But if I want to do, most people use this for literally a line, but you can do it between two locations as well. So if I click here and I click here, I'll drop down and I can get this. And of course, once you've got these things, it's just a matter of going into the properties to see if you can change some of the colors or the font sizes so that it'll fit accordingly. Okay, so the two ways you can do is either click on some long line here, drag it out, or click once on click on one point, click on another point, and then drag it down. The other one that we've got here under the place menu is a radial. The radials only work for radial things. So you can see we do have a radial here. So if you put your cursor on a line, or you'll see it won't give you a prompt that's only a radius. So if I take this and pull it out, you can see that now I've got a radius here, okay, which should make sense because it's a radial. I'm just moving over here so I have for the next one here, and we're going to do the place diametral. So again, very much like the radius, you've got to only work on an arc. You click on it, you pull it out, and voila, you're done. Okay, so pretty straightforward so far, but just knowing what you've got to click on. We do a place mention over here. We do an angular one. So angular actually works too. They can work in either on the straight lines or on the arcs. So I'll demonstrate both of those. So let's say I want to know what this is. So I clicked here once on this line, and I click here on this line, and I pull it out, and you can see I got 90 on this. Now I am going to do an Control Z on this because I'm going to do another one over here in a moment, but I'll let me do it down here so you can see it. Again, let's do a place, again, angular dimension, first, second, pull out, we're done. Can it work on arcs? You bet. Let's do that again. So place, angular dimension, and you can do it. You notice it really will allow you to do something really specific here if you see this, right? So there's multiple pieces I can grab. So if I go from here to here, for example, and pull it out, there's 101.25. So it gives you some options on that one. The next one, and I'm still in the mode, so let's click that out. Okay, the next one drove me crazy, but I finally figured out, and it's kind of neat. So this one, this ordinate dimensions, it needs to have a reference. So it's not just taking 2 points and giving you some measurement. It's basically a measurement based off of what we'll call an initial origin that you set. So when we do that over here, I am going to basically start this one. So we'll do a place ordinate, and I'm going to click on the corner. I find that this one works best if you use the points and not the lines on this. So you have to give it its initial origin. So here we go. So there's our initial origin. And then from there, let's say I want the center of this one. There it is, right? If I want basically, let's say from this this particular pad of this footprint, there it is there. And you can even go the opposite direction. So let's say I want to do this one over here. Wow, there it is. So it gives you basically measurements based off of your initial, well, let's say your initial 0 point. Okay. And then the last one they've got is the XY axis. This one's kind of neat, but I also find it to be a little persnickety in terms of getting it, controlling it once it's placed down. Placing is not that hard, it's just controlling it afterwards. So the place menu, the XY, basically says, okay, give me 2 points, or you start with a point and then you kind of crawl up where you want to go. And so if you see how that works, I clicked here and now I'm crawling up over here, I click again and I can pull it out. And one thing I find is sometimes it'll let you get right to the edge and sometimes it won't. And sometimes I think that's just simply because it all depends on whether it's on the grid pattern or not. But once you place this down, that's kind of it. What I found is that once you place this down, yeah, you can change the leader lines, you can change some of the scaling here, but the distance that you got over here, it will not allow you to control. So, and by the way, it works on the X-axis as well. So there you go on that. There's a couple other things I'd like to show you that are kind of buried in here. They might be a little bit esoteric, but I think at the same time, they're kind of good to know that they're in here. So I'm going to jump to another polling question. I'll get that one started here. There is a feature in Altium called the finished surface. And I'll show it first and then I'll open the poll. And I'm kind of curious to know if you guys have used it or not. So under place annotations, you'll see that there is this thing called the surface finish. If you put it there, it's just kind of a cute checkbox. Okay, and we'll talk about this one more here in a minute, but I'm curious, have you used it? So I'll get that poll going here. So if you can take a moment to help me launch it, and then you can use it. There we go. And I think everybody's checked in right now, and I'll show you the results over here. So the vast majority of you guys have not used it. A couple of you have. And so I will basically going to give you an overview of what it is. And that's really up to you as to whether or not you'd want to use it. Now, I could see why many people wouldn't necessarily need to use it or want to use it, only because what this basically is telling you is the surface finish. And a lot of that could be put in the fabrication notes, but I could see people using, if you're using a CNC machine, or you're using, or you're trying to V-score something because it's a panel, then I could definitely see this possibly being used. Now, with that being said, let me bring back my PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to go from the current slide, and I want to show you something here. So this is what you're seeing over here actually is this symbol here. This is the default symbol. It basically means that there is a surface. I've seen it written up different ways, which I do like, and one of them basically says like there's no, the surface is as is. There's nothing that you really have to do to the surface. These other surfaces, you got to remember that we're talking about printed circuit boards. The people who use this on a constant basis on the mechanical side, they're saying, well, is this a smooth surface? Is it a rough surface? Is there some type of thing we're supposed to put onto this surface? So there's other things to indicate whether you need to machine this. So you possibly might have to do that for a CNC machine. Or you say like, hey, the surface is as is, whatever comes out, comes out. Don't try to correct it or polish it or anything of that nature. You will not see these in Altium, at least not now. And if we do, that means that the entire manufacturing process has changed, but this is for rounded surfaces. Okay. Here's your symbol over here, and then there's various things that they have that there's a standard for this, and you can kind of see what they have. So Altium really left out F, A, and L out of this whole equation. So they basically have to do with roughness values because, quite honestly, we generally don't work with roughness. Maybe there's copper roughness, but in the end, our end product has got it's got a solder mask on top of it, so we're not really dealing with the roughness from that perspective, unless you are using a CNC machine to cut out through copper, or you're trying to use a CNC to mill out around the board for a panel. And that's the idea that I think that they're shooting for with this over here. Okay, so I'm gonna escape out of this for the moment and just kind of show what it kind of looks like. So if you've got this here, normally you put it near a surface if you wanted to indicate what your intention is, and then you have your various requirements. And so you'll notice that Altium didn't say roughness. It doesn't really match up to the list that I showed you in that PowerPoint slide here, but it does put them in different locations depending on what you've put over here. So like the first, so I'm gonna say the manufacturing, let's say we're doing CNC over here. The first requirement, let's say that I don't want a depth any more than 20 mil, well, let's say the first requirement is I'm going to V-score it. And I may be completely off on this, by the way, guys, but just to give you an idea of what this looks like. And maybe the second requirement over here is both sides. And that V-score is like, let's say 20 mils per side. And again, I may be using this very wrong, but at least that's the intention that they're trying to give over here with this. Okay, so there's the so that's the way to use this thing called the surface one. Most of you probably haven't used it. Most of you are probably just saying, "I'll just dump this in the fab notes." So I get that, but if you're going beyond just handing off to a fabricator, you may need to look at this, especially if there's any internal machining that's going to be done with it. So. The other thing I'm going to talk about, well, let me talk about one other one before I jump to the next one in here. Let me talk about callouts and notes. Now, we did talk about notes in the other webinar, but it's kind of a good review just to see what goes on over here. So with the notes, I'm going to drop this in here, and you'll notice that automatically it says 18, 19, and 20. And the reason it says that is because there's already another notes primitive that's in the Draftsman. Okay, so there's one that already goes from 1 through 17. So Altium says, well, I'll continue 18, 19, and 20. So if you need to make any changes to these, you've got to click on the particular note, and then you go in there, and you can move them up or down. You can add another note in between, and you can even delete them. Now, why do I bring this up? Because there's also these other features in the place menu under annotations that are called the callouts. So I can put a call out where I want to. You'll see that again that there are little orange lines or dots that can help me prompt in there. And the default one is a custom call out. So I can put anything I want there. So I could say like hello, not that that would be of any use. But most of the time people are going to try to link this either to a node item or to a BOM item. And there's some other ones here, all depending on whether or not you actually have placed those from the place menu. Now, I don't have a BOM item here, but I do have a node item, and it's kind of neat to watch this here. So once you do the node item, I'm going to say that this is note 19. Okay, so there's note 19 there, and I could have a box on this as well. Let's see if I can find the box here really quick. Border, give me a box. There we go. So there's box 19. Now that actually now Altium links this this point with this node over here. So if I say I'm going to push this one up, whoops, not new, push this one up. There we go. You see this now became note number 18, or if I push it down here, you'll see it's now note 21. So Altium maintains that, so you don't have to worry about that. And of course, you can change these notes as you see fit. And it makes it very easy to create fabrication notes and to make modifications to them. Okay. The last one I want to ask you guys about, and I'll probably butcher this one as well, there is a feature in Altium, and I do apologize because it's not something I think a lot of us use, but they made them available, and I do want to give you kind of a nickel tour of them very quickly. They're called the datum feature and the feature control frame, and these do go together with each other. So I'm going to kick off one more. Poll here. Have you used the datum feature in Draftsman? So I'm going to get that started over here. No, datum. Oh, don't have it in here. Okay, I do apologize. I guess we don't, I must have not added in. All right, well, I'm gonna give you guys a brief introduction to the datum stuff. Anyways, here, I was kind of curious to see if anybody had used them, but nevertheless, let me do this. First, I'm gonna go back into my, PowerPoint presentation. Let's go from the current slide. And I'm gonna talk about this. So datums and control features are part of something called GDT, which is geometric dimensioning and tolerances. And there's some really great videos on this. There's this one over here that talks about this. There's some, I'll show you some here in just a moment. I've got them up on my web browser. But what GDT is trying to say is like, look, normally under most circumstances, we give a measurement along with a tolerance. And in the mechanical world, that's not enough. So what they're saying basically, do I have it here? Here it is. Yep, applying tolerances to features, not dimensions. And so what they do is they say, okay, if you're gonna provide tolerances, we have to have some context as to what we're doing it to. And there's actually 12 of these different features or that they have that you can do it to. So for form or location, and these are things that you can do with these. And so there's a whole symbolic feature to this. And if you go onto a lot of these websites that talk about GDT, they explain what they're looking for each one of these things. So the first one is that you got the symbol. The second one is the actual tolerance. Now, if you've got something that's round, then you can actually put this in here. And then you have your datums depending on if a datum is needed. So why do they talk about datums? What are datums? So you have to remember that if you have something that's three-dimensional, it has 6 degrees of freedom. It can go left, right, top, down, up and down, and towards you or away from you. So in certain instances, really it comes down to inspection. So in order for me to inspect something, I have to kind of lock it into position. Because if, let's say for instance, even let's say I take a board, right? If I measure something, but I'm measuring it from the back side, I might get a different reading than if I measured it from the front side. And that's what they're concerned about, is they want everything to be consistent, so you put some datums in there. And some of the datums, as I said, for some things you would probably want to have datums, others you don't necessarily need them. The one that I'll give you an example to is like flatness. So a lot of us don't want things that are warped, right? So you could put out a datum that says, look, I don't want any more than 5 mils warpage. And then you may also even just say, if you want, you could say the datum saying like, all right, here's the surface, basically saying I'm locking this into the X, Y, and Z coordinates, right? So let me give you an example, demonstrate this over here. I'm gonna drop this one over here. So let's say I'm worried about my flatness. I wanna put a control feature there. So I'm gonna do a place, annotations, and I'm gonna do a feature control frame. And of course, initially you start off, you're like, what is this thing? And if you click on this, you'll see, let me get on there again. You will see down here in the symbols, there's all of the different ones I just showed you up there. It'd be nice if Altium actually showed you the symbol, but nevertheless, these are all the ones that you can provide within the GDT family of ways of doing tolerances. And so I'm going to say I want flatness, and you can see now that it actually added in the symbol for flatness. And now over here, it's going to say, well, okay, do you have any special symbols? Like again, in this case, I'm not, because I'm just dealing with, I'm not dealing with a rounded surface. And then I'll put my tolerance in here and say 5 mils. Okay, so you'll see the next thing got jumped in there automatically. And just for this purpose, I'll put 3 datums in there. You don't have to do it for flat surfaces, but just to demonstrate the idea. So you've got these 3 surfaces. And so if someone was going to inspect this for flatness, then I would expect them to have a flat surface. That will be datum A. And that I would expect them to have an orientation where B would say, okay, this orientation would be over here. And then there would be one for the, like there's a horizontal and a vertical, right? So you're basically locking down the X, Y, and Z positioning so that the measurement is done consistently. Let's say I made 100 of these, that the measurement would be consistent throughout each one of these that was being tested. So here I'll do a place menu and I'll do annotation, and I will put in the datum feature. So let's say here I'm just going to put A. All right, and then the next one. Now you can do a copy and paste, but I find that if you do a copy and paste, you can't get it on the vertical line. So I'm going to place it again, and we'll do the control frame, and you'll note, sorry, not the control frame. Come on, hang in there. Paste, there we go, annotation, and we're going to do the datum feature. So here I can do this and pull it out, and I can change that one by clicking on it and doing the B. And then the last one I could say okay, and the last one I'd probably say C, and I could probably put that one up over here. So let's do a place, annotation, and the datum feature. And even if you put it, if it goes upside down, it's okay. You can just pull it up at that point. And then lastly, we would change this one over here. Okay. And that's how you'd use the datum feature. Now, I mentioned I have some resources for you, and I guarantee you others will teach this better than you. I just wanted to give you a quick introduction so you might be able to make use of it. I'm going to bring up my, hopefully this is the right one. Yeah, so let me bring this over here and just show you some of the ones that I found that were really useful. Okay, turn this one off here. So there's one video that I found over here called Understanding GD&T Efficient Engineering. I really like this one. It's a very wonderful introduction to the whole concept of the GD&T and the control frame and the datums. So definitely take one to look at. But I guarantee you'll find a ton of different GD&T things out there. There's whole classes on this thing. You can get really in depth in it, but I don't know if we necessarily need to do that for PCBs. But if you're just looking to get some more information, you can use it. This goes back to the profiling of well, this one was also GD&T. This one does a nice job. So this was GD&TBasics.com. You can go back over here. Oops, let me go back to this one because I can get the symbols. And it shows you all the symbols. And when you go into them, it shows you what they expect. So if I do the profile of this one, it shows you what it looks like. So if you're going to use this particular profile of a surface, it needs 2 datums. Some of them need 3, some of them don't even need them. So it's just a matter of going through that and seeing which ones that you want. And by the way, I have no affiliation to any of the ones I'm showing over here. I just thought they were cool sites. And then over here, the finished symbol, is this another one here? Yeah, this just talked a little bit more about, yeah, again, just another thing. I don't know if I'd necessarily do this one. I did provide a symbol, or pardon me, I think I provided a link for the surface mount in the PowerPoint earlier. So, but this is where they are. It's just easy enough to find. People do a really great job of putting that stuff out there because they want people to know about it. So with that being said, that's going to kind of conclude my presentation here on the Draftsman element. I would like to throw one poll at you now that you've seen these things. I'm just kind of curious if there's something here that I showed today that was of value to you, and you can answer multiple times. So I'm going to launch that one. Okay, I'm going to close it here, and hopefully you guys can see the results. So it looks like a good portion of you got some use out of the template details. I'm glad to hear that. A good about 2/3 of you for the explanation of the dimensions. I found that even though as simple as they are, they can become frustrating if you don't know how to kind of work the way Altium intended to work. On the surface finishes, I kind of figured as much. I know it's more of a GD&T thing. Pardon me, it was more of a fabrication node thing, since we don't normally rough up our boards or come up with finishes beyond the stuff that we spray on them. And then the GD&T was interesting. Okay, so about 50% of you guys got something there. And for those that found something that I didn't list, that's great too. I'm glad I was able to provide something there for you. And then one other one, if you don't mind me, just what do you think of the webinar today? I'm going to open that one up. And there you go. And we will get that launched there. Great. And I'm going to close this over here so you guys can see it. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys, and for the 6% that hopefully you did still get something out of it. But I'd like to get some feedback from you if there's something that you thought we should have covered, or things that you didn't necessarily agree on. If you're cool with that, throw a note or two into the questions panel over there. Would appreciate that. All right. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to talk just a few minutes about 9.connects here. Let me bring back my PowerPoint presentation. Well, guys, in short, I'm going to just kind of do it based on memory over here. You're here for a reason, and that was that you could learn a few things about the Draftsman tool. Here at 9.connects, we do provide 3 different things. We provide we provide basically PCB design services, and we also do training, and we do library work. As you mentioned, I wish I could show you the slide. We do like the ugly stuff. You know, always open door. If you're trying to do something that's a little bit out of your wheelhouse, and you're just trying to figure out what to do, give us a call. There's no pressure, and we'd rather make sure that you're successful because you know, we're here. We're not necessarily a charity, but at the same time, we want you to be successful. If you're successful, the industry's successful, we're successful. So if you're going to try to tackle something that's, again, a little bit complex, give us a shot.